Just after I left school, I think, I can remember just going to one party in particular, and just a friend of mine, and we all just left. And so I kind of was doing the impressions of all the teachers that they'd left behind. And instead of just being, like a minute or two, it kind of went on for about sort of 10 or 15 minutes, and people were sort of gathered around. I thought, gosh, this is quite fun. And I went to university in London, and that actually kind of worked out quite well for me, because just at that time it was the beginning of the 1980s, and the cabaret circuit was really booming in London, because some of the theatres, they were above pubs, and they changed the regulations. So instead of having plays and things, they were going for stand-up comedy. And that was a real explosion when there was the Comedy Store and Alexis Sale and John Dowie and people like Julian Clary and Harry Enfield were all kind of in that sort of 82, 83, 84, 85. It was a really thriving circuit. And so I kind of found my feet, cut my teeth, had my education there, really. I learned a lot about life, a lot about stand-up. At that time, so I was able to do kind of lectures and seminars and stuff in the day, and the evening I'd be doing shows, and you could do 3 shows an evening. You'd start at the Hemmingford Arms up in Islington, and then maybe the Finborough in Earl's Court, and end up at Jongleurs in Battersea, and they were great days. And some of the people are still working now. Mark Steele, Jenny A. Clare. That was the first show I did in Edinburgh as a stand-up, was with Mark Steele and Jenny Eclair in 1984, I think it was. And they're still going strong, and hopefully so am I. When I started out at the BBC, the first series I did was about 85. I did a show called Now Something Else. And there were sports commentators. I did a lot of comedians, Billy Connolly and Ronnie Corbett. Always sounds like an impression of Rob Brydon now, doesn't it? How could I do that? But it was a mainstream variety kind of show, with John Dowie, with the Flaming Hamsters, with Steve Steen and Jim Sweeney. That show at the BBC. But I think increasingly I thought, well, if you can do impressions, you should be doing people that are in the public eye, in the news, and have something to say. And it was around about 88, 89 that John Bird first did the show with us. We got him on to do Gorbachev, I think. And I went to see him in a play with John Fortune. And John Bird and John Fortune sort of worked together. They knew each other, and they loved working together. And so round about that turn, just coming into the 1990s, I did a stage show which is directed by John Wells, sort of the third of the Johns, and he was very involved with Private Eye and Richard Ingrams and things like that. And I had a real thirst and interest in politics, and so this brought together two things. I could do the voices on one hand, and I could do the politics on the other. And of course, politically, it was a very fertile time. It was just the end of Thatcherism, so we had sort of the big beast like Michael Heseltine, of course, and Ken Clark. Oh, for some extraordinary reason, Ken Clark is still going. Michael Portillo, of course. Well, that was and John Major, dare I say it. And I remember when John Major arrived, I think most of us who'd done impressions of train spotters during our lives, and said, oh yes, I know, yes, that's the 7:15 from Carshalton, and it usually goes into Clapham Junction. And then you turn on the radio, and this guy's been made Prime Minister. But it was a train spotter voice, but with a little bit of Julian Clary. Just a little bit of Julian Clary thrown in. And if you mix up Julian Clary and a train spotter, you get John Major. It's rather remarkable. And so he became, I think he was the mainstay of our first series with Channel 4 in 1992, when he won the election rather improbably, if I may say so. Beating Neil Kinnock. And so, I suppose, middle of the 1990s, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Blunkett, all these characters are emerging. There are a lot of characters, more than there are now. Now we're sort of down to the big three of Donald Trump. Gotta say, big, huge character, really, really big, and they love him at the corporates. They love hearing from. I don't think we've ever seen so many people at a conference before. There's got to be 250,000 people here today. They tell me there's 110, but there's such dishonest people. So we have Donald Trump, we have we have Boris Johnson. Let me entertain you, and of course Nigel Farage, and they're the kind of three big beasts, and so it's interesting how times change politically, and you have to use have different material, different takes on different characters, but I've just always been fascinated with politics and what's going on, and trying to make sense of what's going on and then make nonsense of it. That's what I try to do, so that you're making people laugh, but also there's a truth underneath what you're saying. Some politicians got a little bit testy. I think Margaret Beckett wasn't very happy because I rang her up as Gordon Brown just on the day of the election in 2000, and I think it was 2005, I think, somewhere around there, and we had a conversation because I rang her up in her constituency and said, hi Margaret, how are you doing? So how do you see things after the election of the cabinet? So we talked for a couple of minutes about who should be in the cabinet, and then I said, well, okay Margaret, I've got to go now, so good luck, and we'll speak later in the week. Okay, Gordon, goodbye. And I hung up and I looked up, and there was a row of faces of the producer, and there were about 3 lawyers, and they were going, that is not going out. And I think it was about 2 or 3 years before that saw the light of day. It's always fun to catch politicians out in that. So we did it first with when John Major was Prime Minister and he was having a bad time. Do you remember those days when the Conservative Party was splitting itself up over Europe and having arguments? But yes, long time ago. Unimaginable. You can't imagine a situation where Tories are ripping themselves apart over Europe. But they were. Oh yes. And Howe. No, not Geoffrey Howe, the other. We were tearing ourselves apart, I remember, in the late 1980s. And so I rang up one of the so-called bastards as John Major, while John Major was in the air flying back from Japan. So we rang up this guy, Richard Boddy, I think his name was. And I said, now, come on, what have you been saying behind my back? Well, Prime Minister, I'm just worried about the unemployed. Well, I know, Richard. So am I. I don't want to join them. That's my point. And we had this conversation, and I asked him, I said, now, look, are you coming to the party conference? And he said, well, I don't really go to that. So, well, I want you to come with me, and I want you to dance with me on the last night. So, and we hadn't got a script. We were just sort of making it up. Anyway, it went very well. And but then something weird happened, and the word got out in the Cabinet Office because somebody said, I've had this call from John Major, and so the Cabinet Secretary, Robin Butler, was put in charge of an inquiry, and he rang up Richard Boddy and said, did you get a call from John Major? It wasn't John Major. He said, no, I think it was. I think I'd know if it wasn't John Major. So, but they had to find out, because John Major said, well, this is very funny, but it could get quite serious. So there was this hunt going on, and I think somehow or other Robin Butler must have contacted Michael Grade, who had the tape in his desk, and so we were sort of rumbled that way. But it's in John Major's book. I think he says that well-known wag Rory Bremner was having a jape or a wheeze, and that was it. But that was treated with good humour. But I think when it happened with Margaret Beckett, she was a little bit more serious-minded. I mean, for me, there's 2 things about a corporate. Is firstly, is when it's taking place, is obviously it's taking place in a context in the world outside. So it's always great to be responding to what's happening in the news that day, or that week, or who's just resigned or who's about to resign. I mean, that's for a topical comedian to just. For me, a corporate is just another audience. It's an audience that perhaps in some ways wasn't expecting to be entertained, maybe, and you just go in there and you say, just talk about what's been going on in the news that day or on the way in. So for me, that's great fun, and that's the challenge of it. That's the buzz of it, really. So you are inventing material for that night's show, and I still have the feeling, all the time, every time I go to a show, or every time I wake up, I've got a show that evening. There's still that excitement. You go, oh, I could do that tonight, or I could talk about that tonight, or what could I say about this? So there's that. But But the other side of corporates is engaging with the audience, because of course they have a world in which they operate. And I think that's where the briefing call has become much more important in recent years. And when I was young, a briefing call. I mean, when I was, didn't do that kind of stuff. But now, I think perhaps because now people have got more professional about it, and there are people in the company whose ass is on the line, shall we say, and they want to make sure that they've made the call. But from my point of view, I can pick up a lot of information from that, particularly about I always say, well, so what are they talking about when these guys when they get together in the bar afterwards, before or after the show? What are they talking about? What's happening in their business? And there are performers who don't feel comfortable with corporates, but for me it's another audience, and it's an audience that night, so I can talk about what's been going on that day, and I can engage with that company. And I think the challenge is to make that particular group of people laugh on that particular day. And there's no better feeling than to be going back after doing a show thinking, those guys, those people, that audience, you talked about what they do, you got into their world, you made them laugh about the things that they do, and a whole lot of other stuff besides. And it's really very fulfilling because they know that you've taken the trouble to find out about them and to make them laugh about what they do. But also, you brought hopefully a little bit of magic from what you do. And that's the mixture that I find both a challenge and a joy. I mean, it's great fun doing stuff with other speakers and not knowing what to expect. I did do a conference the other day. It was a Yorkshire Business Conference, and the organiser, he was really pleased. He said, you've got a great speaker coming on after you, great speaker. I said, who have you got? He said, Elle Macpherson. I said, what, the model? He said, yeah. I said, oh, right. I said, what's she going to talk about? He said, who cares? And then he introduced her like that in front of the audience. He had 2,000 businessmen at a conference centre in Harrogate. He said, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased we got a next booking. When I said we've managed to get Elle Macpherson, and somebody said to me, they said, what's she going to talk about? And I said, who cares, ladies and gentlemen." Just outrageous. Oh dear. But it's a joy. I still love this. It's still a privilege. But you get out of it what you put into it. And I think if you do the briefing call, you do a bit of homework, you do a bit of research, you spend time, you have dinner with the client on the night, then you're doing a show for those people on that occasion. And it'll only ever be done like that at that time once. And it's special. That's it's a challenge because it keeps you on your toes, but it's so rewarding. Not just, you hope, for the audience, but also for the performer, because you think, well, that's what you were there for, and it's a good feeling because you think that's you gave them exactly what they wanted. There are places that I always enjoy. I mean, the Grosvenor House. Some people hate it. I love it. I love the Grosvenor House. The balcony always makes me think of a cruise liner. They're all the way. Particularly if they've only got the bottom floor, and you do Donald Trump say, "Look at all those people up there, thousands of people," and there's nobody there. There's thousands of people all the way up there. That's good fun. So on a packed awards night, Grosvenor House, when you're doing that, you've got to hit them with those sort of 20 minutes, or they say, we just want 10 minutes. But for a comedian, 10 minutes, that's too little, you want to do more. So if you do a really good 20 minutes and then into the awards, and they're all up for it, and you've got, 1,200 people right there, that's the best feeling there is. It really is.